are an artificial intelligence technology startup, and we use AI, machine learning, automation, and related advanced technologies to help build solutions for learning and accessibility. So today I'm joined by my colleague Deepika, who will be managing today's webinar and moderating all the questions on the Q&A chat feature. We also have closed captioning for everyone to be able to follow along. So a little bit about our organization, just as a quick background. We consist of a team of learning and higher educational professionals, as well as technologists, which actually has provided a really unique perspective while we've built some of the accessibility-based technology solutions. And we got lots of amazing input and feedback from the community along the way. So we are hosting basically a series of webinars to talk about accessibility and learning. And our goal is to really, educate the community, learn from the community, and of course, explore varied perspectives. So this is the first of our webinar series. We're focusing on the evolution of accessibility, and we're going to be today looking at trends, both pre and post-COVID-19. So we'd love some audience participation and interactions. So please post your questions anytime. We'd likely probably get into the questions in the second half of our webinar. But if you can identify your institution or company name and your role, that would be fantastic. It would, give us some context when we respond to your questions. So with all that being said, I'm excited to be inviting our first guest on our accessibility webinar series, Darcy Duran. She has years of experience in higher education, instructional design, and accessibility. Darcy, so happy to be chatting with you today.
Thanks, Vijay. I'm glad to be here too. Just a little bit of background about myself. Currently, I'm the Associate Vice President for Learning Design for our higher ed clients for AnswerSource. As you'd mentioned, I've been in higher ed for about 17 years. I'm a Quality Matters peer reviewer, and I've had that role since 2007. I also facilitate QM workshops, and I teach online college graphic design courses. So it's great to be here, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Great, thank you, Darcy. So again, we're so pleased that several of you were able to join us, and today is Global Accessibility Day, and so it's really awesome for all of us to be connecting on such an important topic. So today, just a little brief background on what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to be covering basically the origins of accessibility and UDL principles, which is Universal Design for Learning. We're going to take a look into how higher education has moved to comply with accessibility guidelines before COVID-19. We're going to look at how accessibility has been affected by the pandemic, where we are now, and where we possibly will go from here. And then, of course, we want to identify how we, as a community of partners and educators and accessibility professionals, can continue to come together to support each other in meeting the diverse needs of our learners. And as I mentioned, please feel free to post your questions. We'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more to our audience here. And then, and Darcy, it would be great if you can also maybe talk a little bit about this webinar to set the tone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been talking to several professionals in our field lately, and I've been reading a lot of articles on accessibility, especially what's been going on this last year. And there's been a lot to reflect upon. So when Vijay and I started talking about what has been happening, we thought it would be rewarding to bring this to a larger conversation with folks. We thought we would reflect on our own experience. A few of these topics that came to mind are how we were each introduced to accessibility, how we have seen accessibility evolve over the years and its effect on higher ed, the important impact it has had on our learners' lives, how COVID-19 has impacted our accessibility efforts, and how we can come together as a community of practitioners to keep making positive progress forward.
Yeah, great. Darcy, thank you so much. Again, we're very excited to be talking today on this topic of accessibility. We are always thrilled to have these conversations with professionals and leaders in higher education And, and again, how is accessibility not just relevant to some, but to all of us? And so I'd love to maybe start with just hearing a little bit about your experience in your own career relating to accessibility. And then also if you can talk about personal influences on, if and how accessibility has retained a special place in your life over the years, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. So I started my professional career as a graphic and web designer in the private sector in the early 2000s. The American with Disabilities Act had actually been passed in 1990, but I hadn't really heard too much about what that entailed exactly at that time in my career. So after working in the private sector for a few years, I landed a job at Eastern Wyoming College. And this is really where I started my career in higher ed as well, and really started becoming more aware of what accessibility is, and specifically web accessibility. So at EWC, I was their web developer and instructional technologist. I was interested in accessibility, not because it was the law, but because it's the right thing to do. At EWC, I did most of my own training on accessibility, just kind of looking at the really low hanging fruit, like putting alt tags on images. We also started offering synchronous remote courses where the instructor at the home college would give a live class, and then we would have all these outreach classes in the eastern part of Wyoming, and it was like a live broadcast kind of station. We didn't have Zoom back then. So it was just really important for us to find ways to make learning accessible to everyone that wanted an education. Also, at EWC, as I mentioned, is a rural part of Wyoming, and they serve students across most of the eastern part of the state. And later, I also continued my accessibility journey at Trinidad State Junior College, which is another kind of small rural community college in southern Colorado. And then again, later at Colorado Community Colleges Online, where we formed, and at both these institutions, we formed accessibility task forces and implemented accessibility plans. So on a more personal note, when I was in Wyoming, I also received my bachelor's and started my master's degree program. And again, I was living in a rural community in Wyoming, and the closest four-year college was about 2.5-hour drive one way. And that just wouldn't have been something that I could have done at the time. So distance education through online courses and the live remote courses, and even they would send us these VHS tapes back in the day to watch our instructors, really became vital for me to obtain my education. During around this time as well, my cousin, who is my same age, lost her eyesight, and she could no longer attend her university. She was actually going face to face. It just became too hard, and so she dropped out of school. And I asked her, so why don't you take online courses? And she just said that they weren't accessible and it was just too hard. So again, that just made me, this became really personal moment for me, and I became even more interested in accessibility. And I do believe strongly that anyone who wants to obtain an education should have an opportunity to get one. Excuse me. As far as designing courses, so throughout my career as an instructional designer, we would incorporate universal design for learning principles in our courses. UDL had its beginning from the civil rights movement, mostly through architecture. Ron Macy at North Carolina State University first developed the idea of universal design for learning from the universal design for architecture movement. And the universal design for architecture is to create structures that are designed to accommodate diverse users. So with this concept in mind, architects realized that when they applied universal design to their structures, this often improved the building's functionality. So for example, if an architecture designs a sidewalk for individuals with wheelchairs, it can also be benefit others who are pushing like strollers or using sidewalks for other purposes. So in education, the universal design principles were also applied to learning. And the UDL framework really does value diversity through proactive design and an inclusive curriculum, and thereby eliminating or reducing barriers to academic success. So UDL is not just for learners with documented disabilities, but for individuals that may not disclose their disability. English as a second language learners, for instance, and other learners that have different learning needs. This is really to be more inclusive and to address diversity. We've also, we're looking at other things like having diverse imagery of individuals in our courses as well. And just looking for ways to assess our students in different ways, having different types of materials, assessments, and activities. So accessibility has just kind of become part of the culture, just become part of all of our cultures, and we're in these organizations that I've worked at.
Yeah, and Darcy, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's just, again, very, I would say, very powerful to kind of look at personal stories, right? And that kind of brings us to how it's not happening to someone, it's happening to someone we know, and possibly we are part of, the learner ecosystem. At some point, we are going to go online. We're probably going to need diverse, materials and different ways to be able to participate in any type of learning, right? And again, my educational background has been in journalism, and I don't have a background in accessibility, but I've spent about 16 years or so working in higher education in the partner ecosystem, been part of organizations that supported higher educational institutions, publishers, corporate L&D efforts. So, I've seen things, for instance, from helping design learning experiences, taking content online, building course resources. And again, in the early days, and, I'm again going back to when I first started being part of this world, it was very rare to really talk about accessibility. And so when I look back at what you're saying, it was probably like closed captioning was probably one of the early things that came about. And, but in the last, particularly, I would say in the last decade, and maybe like the last 5 or 6 years, notably, we are seeing, and again, just being part of this ecosystem, we are seeing where accessibility and UDL features more consistently when we are talking about higher education content and learning. And so, that's very heartening. And again, when we are looking at where we were in the years back and where we are, now, it's been interesting to see this space evolve. And, we've all, whoever has been part of higher ed and learning for years, decades, kind of has this experience. But yeah, I'd love to hear what has been your experience in kind of watching the space evolve.
Yeah, so like you said, I've seen huge evolution over the years, and it also warms my heart. As I mentioned earlier, we started off trying to make our websites accessible to blind students, or adding captioning to videos you had mentioned, and then using technology to broadcast our instructors to outreach sites. And although sometimes there needed to be mandates from the top, I've really seen how educators have come together and stepped up and done what is needed to make learning more accessible to our students. Educational technology, oh my gosh, that's been become more robust and affordable. There are such things as online tutoring, online student services. I've even seen these like chat bots to help quickly answer students' questions. And they're still kind of rough, but I'm really seeing that this will become more useful in the future. In the beginning, our courses were fairly flat. There was very little video and images, and some of that had to do with the internet speeds were much slower than they are now. Now we have robust interactives, simulations, virtual reality. These are fantastic, but if you have certain disabilities, they can be unusable. So we do need to find alternatives or find ways to make these accessible to all our students. So overall, tech has become more affordable. Multimedia has come a long way. It has become more complex and time intensive to develop. But I've seen artificial intelligence really make huge strides. I can't wait to see what the future holds. I will say one thing. I'm, of course, a huge supporter of technology to enhance learning. But I just like us to be careful that technology should enhance the learning. The technology should not drive the learning. Just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. Another area I've seen really grow is the use and development of open educational resources. I first became of OER content probably around the mid 2000s, but I just didn't see a lot of people readily adopting it at first. But over the past, I would say 6-7 years, I've really seen them become much more used and accepted. OERs can be a good way to help our students obtain their materials at no cost. So for instance, the Instructional Technology Council, they put out a survey each year to community college leaders across the country. And their survey results stated that 77% of community college leaders anticipate that OERs will have a significant impact to their organizations in the next 3 to 5 years. So definitely something to keep an eye on. OERs are becoming more leveraged in higher ed. And at the same time, I've also seen the publisher content really improve as well. They have these just awesome, robust learning platforms, which can incorporate adaptive learning techniques, for instance. And this can really help with different learning preferences as well. And I've also seen the publishers make their platforms and their e-text meet web accessibility guidelines. So this has been great to see.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Darcy. So it's, the themes that you're talking about are, again, very compelling. We're talking about affordable, accessible, equitable educational resources. We're talking about using technology as, an asset, looking at innovation to help the learner, as opposed to innovation in a vacuum for itself. Again, building with the community, looking at where problems are, looking for technology and innovation to solve problems and challenges. And again, those are, again, themes that I think are very powerful, not just in our industry, but just overall. And again, the evolution has been really interesting to watch, especially in the last couple of years. In my own experience and just everything that we're reading, everything that we're seeing around the globe, the opening of doors for more of this more affordable and equitable learning. It's also kind of closely mirroring what's happening across other industries. And I feel like we are just starting to recognize the importance of embracing differences, learning preferences, cultures, backgrounds. And again, I'm curious, do you feel like this is helping with building more awareness into just accessibility and accessibility initiatives at higher educational institutions?
Yeah, great observations, VJ. And I couldn't agree more. Yes, I do. I've really seen, especially this past year, a more directed approach to accessibility. In my opinion, we need to be more intentional when we approach accessibility. We are ensuring that we are being more, we need to be more inclusive in our courses. And I'm seeing that, making sure that we use, just as I mentioned before, diverse individuals, for instance, in the imagery. Making sure our students have the access they need to be successful. I'm seeing that it is really becoming part of our culture more. And again, that warms my heart to see this transformation. As I had mentioned, learning is becoming more affordable with OERs. The cost of technology is becoming more affordable. A lot more people are having access to high-speed internet, and we're just becoming more aware of different learners' needs. And, but, we still have room for improvement, and we're getting there.
Sorry, I was on mute. So there are some good questions that we have here. And so, Darcy, I don't know if you wanted to address them now or if we want to wait until we had covered a couple more questions. Totally up to you.
We can address them.
Yeah. So we have one from Joan, which says academic institutions, campuses have facilities used for off-campus meetings and events. In what ways do those on campus with knowledge of accessibility advise all of the facilities used by many more than students and faculty understand design, delivery, accessibility?
Okay, sorry, I had to reread that a little bit. Thank you, Joan. So I would say if you're going off campus for a meeting or an event, I think you'd really want to talk to the folks that are at that facility, like the IT folks or the educational technology folks, and see what kind of technology they have there that you could leverage. Otherwise, you can bring a lot of the technology with you. And just like this right now, we can see, the captioning's going on. And I think just understanding what the goal of that meeting is, and maybe even working with an instructional designer or some other folks like that to really help get goals for that meeting and see how you can leverage that technology to maybe even make it like a hybrid meeting. And then, like I said, with the accessibility, those are things you'd really want to think about beforehand, because it is an intentional, it takes some time and a thoughtful process. So I hope that answers the question. Not off campus, on campus for non-campus events. Joan, could you explain that a little bit more? Could we put her on?
Yeah, could we unmute Deepika, Joan, if you're comfortable?
Thank you. I am comfortable speaking things. So what I'm thinking about is that I'm in the world of hospitality and meetings, and that a lot of universities have conference centers. They have other facilities, arenas, and so on that are used by non-campus organizations to hold meetings. So what I'm trying to understand is in what ways those of you on campus familiar with issues of accessibility are advising other areas, other facilities on campus, not just those who teach, not just students, what they need to do to, in beyond technology, make their facilities accessible for anyone who uses them. Does that help?
I think so. So are you talking more about like even just getting into the building itself as well?
I would say getting into the building, getting around the building, restroom accessibility, because I work with groups that have had meetings on campuses, and I am involved in an organization that has people from campuses who talk about their arenas, their conference centers, even hotels on some campuses. And so I'm trying to understand where, I'm not sure what to call it, where the intersection perhaps is of the assistance that those of you who are deeply involved in issues of accessibility in teaching also help the campus-wide, maybe that's a better way of explaining it, understand what needs to be done.
Joan, I would say those conversations, I think, tend to need to percolate up to the leaders of that organization, that college, or the, whoever owns that space. And because there's a lot of colleges I've been at have accessibility task force, and this would just definitely be part of that conversation, because they should be making those, making the facilitations or facilities, sorry, accessible to everybody. So yeah, those conversations need to be had.
At a leadership level is what you're saying, Darcy. And
yeah, I think that's where it may need to come up. And then of course you'll have, folks that are in the trenches to help guide that conversation. But yeah, we absolutely need to make everything accessible to everybody that uses our facilities or our technology.
And I think these are like great questions, Joan, when, we are talking about accessibility. We're, of course, today we're focused a little bit on online accessibility, but, we're just talking about access in general for anyone who's coming into an educational institution. And yeah, absolutely, it needs to be equitable. It needs to be supported by leadership. I think the initiatives, again, tend to vary depending on, of course, things like the institution's ability, the availability of personnel, costs, budgets, those kind of things. But I think these are very important considerations, and just something for us to, kind of continue to bring to the table in these types of discussions, but also, when we are collaborating with institution partners to kind of ask them these questions and kind of bring more awareness to the table. Joan, did that answer your question somewhat?
It did. Thank you very much for letting me do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. It looks
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a couple more, Darcy. Should we get to them now?
I can answer, let's see, Hannah, in what ways has working from home affected accessibility innovation? I don't know if it has, Hannah. I honestly, I think that if anything, we're being more thoughtful about it, because we've had to see, what's happened, and we're all remote now. So we really are looking at how technology can leverage all of us to be able to access the work that we need, or the classes that we need. So I actually think, I don't know if it has, I think it's affected it as far as I think it's expanded and gone forward, progressed our accessibility innovations, actually. Yep. And then you want to maybe?
Yeah, Hannah, did that answer your question? Did you have any follow-up questions on that?
I don't really have any follow-up questions. In my head, it was, I feel like it's kind of opened up a lot of accessibility options for employees, because they have more flexibility to, get to a doctor's appointment if they're working from home, or they don't have to deal with the travel involved. I was just kind of thinking that perhaps the tides have changed a little bit and have allowed more people with different abilities the same, kind of leveling things off, if that makes sense.
I agree with you, Hannah. I think, the only downfall I see, that sometimes I see with not being like in an office setting or seeing people one-on-one, sometimes those natural conversations and that flow can maybe spark an idea of creativity when you're with people. But I agree. It's definitely made things more flexible for our lives right now with being so remote this last year.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have one more question from Nidhi. Is it fair to consider access to technology, which is living in a rural area with slower internet, as part of the overall idea of accessibility? What do you think, Darcy?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially internet speeds in the more rural areas, there's still some challenges there, although there's been huge strides in that area. But I do find that as part of the overall accessibility. I was actually talking to an old colleague. He's down in Texas, and he's part of a grant project where they're specifically going out to all these rural areas in the Southeast and Texas area, to these rural areas to get them broadband internet access. So because they were having a hard time accessing, the internet in general, or it was very slow. So is it fair to consider the access of technology? Yeah, I do think it is part of that. It's kind of part of that whole umbrella. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, or any other thoughts? Yep.
Yeah, and thank you, Joan. These are great comments and feedback, and certainly, I agree with you. I totally believe that internet access is a right. And and these conversations, kind of thinking through and working with our, administrators, our institutions, our leadership, across different levels, I think really makes a difference. But thank you all, and please, please keep the questions coming. We have a couple more things we wanted to cover. So again, when we are looking at the history of how online education came about. And, the shift to digital was, again, the goal was really to broaden access to education. So initially, when we look at it, it was about making education available to learners who are not able to afford or come into campuses for various reasons, or could not, for instance, give up their jobs, so they couldn't be full-time learners. So again, although this ultimately came from making education more accessible, which most certainly is about people with either physical or cognitive disabilities, it's again almost like an extension to designing buildings to make sure, again, great points that we had today, to make sure anyone was able to access it. It wasn't, again, just for a small set of people, but you are sharing space. And when we're looking at shared space, all of us have various reasons that where we might be either temporarily or for longer periods of time limited by what we can do to move around, either using stairs or getting through doors. And so again, when we look at some of these design features, they've benefited pretty much all of us. I mean, regardless of ability, we all benefit from having ramps. We all benefit from having automatic doors. So again, we are, of course, the initial goal in the early years, it kind of came about with saying, well, let's make it accessible for those who need it. But, again, Darcy, you made some great points about how not everyone can and is able to disclose or is comfortable to disclose. And I think that's very important. We want to respect privacy always. But it's also not for an exclusive few. It's really for all. So again, I'm curious, again, to hear your perspective on, how are more learners reporting their needs, for accessible materials compared to previous years? And do you feel like these conversations help or encourage the education ecosystem? And again, does it really, these dialogues kind of being open or sharing, do you feel like it helps making courses more accessible? And again, a space is more accessible. And I want to extend it out because some of the questions I think are very rightly so on not just online education, but just, being able to access spaces as we need them as part of learning. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this a little bit when we were preparing for this, and I'd read an article, and it's reasons university students with a learning disability wait to seek disability services, and it's from the Journal of Post-Secondary Education and Disability. And their research found that many students with disabilities may not disclose their disability, as you'd mentioned, and they actually found that they think about 60 to 80% of students with disabilities choose not to disclose their disability. So, so because of this, we really need to be more proactive and incorporate accessibility into all of our practices. Over the years, especially during COVID, I've seen, especially during COVID, like when that first happened, there really was an uptick in accommodation requests, for instance, for the online classes when I worked at CC Online. I don't have any real data at this point, but I expect some of it was out of need because we had to put the rapid development of online courses up, and they couldn't go in to get face-to-face help. Also, I think that it was because of there has been a culture shift. VGA, I think that we are talking about these things more, and we're saying it's okay, and we want you to come to us, and like, how can we support you? So I think that students are becoming more comfortable. But I'll be really curious to see more data in the next like year or so that may actually focus on this subject. So it's just more of a hunch right now.
Yeah, no, and yeah, and all that makes sense. And Darcy, we have another question from Joan, and I was wondering if you wanted to take it now because it actually folds in nicely into my next topic. And Joan says, are universities lobbying with their communities, local, state, and other governmental points of contact about access being a right to bolster enrollment?
That's a really good question. That's interesting. Yeah, I think I do see that there's been, well, I mean, accessibility to ADA, that's law. So really we need to be doing that at all levels. So if an organization isn't doing that, they really should be, they should be. And but there's also, if it's more of a culture thing as well, like, getting training, it can take a lot of resources to do some of these things, but I've seen a lot of like money, and grant money, especially with the CARES Act, even, there was a lot of professional development that could be used for that, when that came out during COVID, just to help prepare our folks and educate them, give professional development. And is it bolstering enrollment? Hopefully by just naturally, that would happen. So I don't think that they're only doing it to bolster enrollment, but I think it's a combination of, just doing the right thing, and then, having that open access, and inclusion. People that may not maybe felt like they could go to college for whatever reason are feeling like, yeah, I can go get an education. There's all this support here and I can do it. Did that answer your question, Jim?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything to add?
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. So the answer is yes, mostly it did. I think that as I read about the struggle to have more students enroll, and the financial issues for universities and for community colleges, I think that it's everybody's struggling. So to me, making education more accessible in every sense of the word, it's smart for all of us. And I think that there are non-traditional students who would also benefit if they had access. So we've all seen this during COVID for younger students who don't have either the hardware or the internet access, and what that has meant. And it goes for adults too, because if you're an adult who wants to take classes and you have others in your home who need access and there isn't solid access. So to me, the partnership among all the parties to create better access makes sense to me. But then I see the world as a place where peace can be made. So let me tell you where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, Joan, those are great points. And yeah, and thank you. And again, it's like, we're talking about, it kind of flows into our next, topic, which is the role that laws, legal repercussions in light of inaction, and, the threat of getting sued, they do have some impact. But I mean, again, it's in the initial aspect of doing something for the sake of it. And then once that passes, what is the change at the authentic level? Does it change our behavior? And do we feel like higher education institutions, as well as just, like you mentioned, everybody, are they moving past that more initial reactive, checking the boxes approach to, taking on accessibility because it's the right thing to do? And then kind of clearly recognizing just the value of how UDL principles, as well as just folding accessibility and good design into everything, the impact it has for everyone. And so, yeah, and then this is probably our next question, Darcy, which is, have you, in your experience, seen accessibility initiatives change over, say, the last 4 or 5 years? Do you feel like institutions are moving past that, that very early phase when the laws came about? Do you feel like there has been a shift, or continues to be a shift, in that direction of actually thinking about inclusive and, equitable access, just as part of everything that's happening, not just, doing the bare minimum?
I have, definitely, especially in the last, like you said, Vijay, I think about the last decade. But what I've really noticed is what has triggered some of this. And I think some of that is just, I've seen more mandates. Sometimes things have to initially start from the top, like the federal laws, individuals starting to sue institutions who are not following the laws. That's something I saw about 7 years ago happening. Our leaders, but the thing is, our leaders really did start paying more attention to this, and they started funding initiatives to educate their faculty and staff. I've seen a lot of folks just take this on and just apply it to their respective areas. And it's not just teaching, it's, our IT departments, student services, facilities, really all parts of the organization. There really isn't more of a focus on accessibility and equity. And I do believe that that'll continue to grow going forward. I'm just seeing a lot more people really taking ownership for these changes and weaving it into, it's just part of their culture and just part of the conversations that they have.
Yeah. And so Darcy, what you're talking about is really where we were before COVID-19 hit, everyone kind of globally, and the billions of learners who are out of schools, colleges, and of course, individuals who are out of jobs. And so in many ways, you're talking about like the initiatives and the progress that was kind of being made. But then again, when the pandemic hit us all, it kind of exacerbated some of the existing inequalities. And a lot of what I was reading, and, of course, we were like hearing this consistently being shared in the community, which was, how it impacted education for the already vulnerable populations. People, again, who are differently able, people who are not connected by great internet. But I also think the other side of the coin was the opening of doors to new opportunities. Again, people thinking outside the box, kind of thinking about innovative solutions, thinking about, okay, so now if this is going to be, some type of new normal, then what does that look like how can we actually make education truly accessible? How can we actually bring about true transformation, not just kind of, try to fill, small gaps, but kind of look at reinventing and looking at how we can just design for a better world. And so in some ways, I would love to hear, like, this is of course, like people who were able to, get funds, were able to kind of very quickly move into that phase of bringing the best of innovations. But I'm also curious to hear from you, because of your role working directly with institutions and community colleges and higher education professionals. How did you see COVID impacting us? Did you feel like it was positive? Did it hurt existing accessibility initiatives? And kind of what are you really seeing is coming up?
Sorry about that. My internet, speaking of internet, kicked me off for a second. So I missed that last sentence you said, Vijay. Sorry about that.
Yes. So I was talking about how, in your role working directly with institutions and, community colleges and higher education professionals, how have you seen, the impact of COVID? Do you feel like it's kind of helped the efforts that were taking place, or did it kind of hurt things that were happening around accessibility initiatives?
I think a little bit of both, actually. So it's kind of layered a little bit. So yes, I think that the pivot that we encountered this last spring was unprecedented. Anybody that was part of it understands that. So I talked to folks who felt, especially in their online learning spaces, that the pandemic actually catapulted their online programs up to 10 years. Just because of having to put their face-to-face based courses up in a week or two, which we referred to as emergency remote teaching. So that was quite challenging. But I will say this to everybody that had to do this: you truly are heroes, and I want to thank you for the long hours and your dedication to our students. Because of this fast pivot, the kind of downside to that is it made it very difficult to make sure that our online programs, our courses, for instance, were web accessible. For instance, perhaps we didn't have time to put captions on our lectures or place alt tags on images if needed. Our students also struggled because not all of them had computers or reliable internet access, as Joan had kind of mentioned before. So according to a survey by New America and Third Way, nearly 60% of college students surveyed last year said that they did not have adequate access to a stable, high-speed internet connection. So students from low-income backgrounds who had relied on campus internet and computers were often stranded and struggling to find technology to not only complete assignments, but also to attend their classes. These were just some of the challenges, but on a positive note again, I've seen more colleges training their instructors on how to teach online. They're hiring more instructional designers. They're offering laptops and hotspots to loan out to their students. They've hired online advisors and online coaches that can help our learners. I've seen more student services offerings more broadly available to all students. I've also seen a more holistic approach to access. So for instance, Amarillo College has a no excuses poverty initiative, and it's to combat student poverty. And the program is designed to increase persistence and improve graduation rates among students from low income backgrounds. And it consists of 4 components: a social services, a food pantry, mentoring, and career center. So having these types of robust systems in place can really help our students that are in need. So generally, I do think that there's more awareness about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, that's part of that whole accessibility umbrella.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Darcy, when I kind of look at it, right, the role of the community is so powerful. So we, if you're kind of looking at the adage, it takes a village. And so in my role, I've worked as a partner to a lot of the higher education institutions and publishers. And again, they deal with a lot of content. They are, of course, responsible for good content, making it to learners, again, making it accessible. So again, as we talk to them, as we kind of interact with them, we see how so many stakeholders are involved, and they all bring in these varied perspectives. And again, a lot of the varied perspectives are, amazing when it comes to building compelling solutions, or again, looking at innovation. And so you're talking about, these new ideas that are coming about, but then also kind of trying to make sure that how can we, make sure that they thrive? Is there a way that we can keep some of these ideas going? It kind of is not something that goes on for a period of time and then stops. And I really feel like having the support of the entire community, the active role they play in contributing to these ideas, to these initiatives and conversations. And that kind of really makes the role of the community so powerful. We're talking about collaboration, we're talking about cooperation, communication, and which are all, the keys to successful outcomes. And probably in every field, but really when it comes to driving accessibility across all we do, we really need champions, right? And so again, when I look at the role of champions and just our experience talking to these partners and institutions, I couldn't say, I couldn't like tell you how important that is, just from, seeing how powerful those roles are. And yeah, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, how do you see higher education working as an ecosystem and coming together, and especially working through these early concepts of innovation and building towards, real impact?
So Vijay, I loved how you said it takes a village, because it really does take a village. So in the early part of the COVID crisis in last March, I experienced a lot of higher ed folks across the country really coming together to help each other out. One example is when I was at CCC Online, for instance, we shared out all of our master shells to the 13 community colleges in Colorado. We were able to do this via our learning object repository. And our staff came together to prepare the master shells and to share those out in about 3 days. This is just one example of many that I saw during this time and continue to see, where educators really were and are the emergency frontline workers through all of this. So again, I just want to say thank you for everyone that poured their hearts into doing what we could make this as least impactful as possible for our students. And I just want to say, like you said, just coming together as a community, we need to continue to come together by becoming part of these types of communities. For instance, there's the Instructional Technology Council for community colleges, WECT, Quality Matters, Creative Commons. There's a lot of different organizations out there. So find one that really resonates with you, and I would say become active as much as you can. Also, the technology vendors can be our partners. I have found that they really do want to develop products that help us support our learners. let's talk to them, because they do want, and let them know that we love their products, that they need to be accessible. Virtual VR, for instance, I'm really excited about its potential, and how can we get that kind of technology into every learner's household? I'm very excited to see how technology can really continue to help us with accessibility. Again, one of the things that has been like automatic captioning for videos has been huge. I mean, this a human still needs to go in and clean it up, but its accuracy rates are around 80% or higher. I mean, that's, in the last 10 years, that's been huge. So things like this can really save us a lot of time. So like I said, come together, share. Let's push the tech companies, because I know they want to be our partners, and we need them, and keep innovating, and just people coming to this chat today really shows your commitment to for our learners' success. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Darcy. So that we kind of come to the end of the topics we wanted to cover. And again, we just want to thank everyone for joining us. We do have 10 minutes. We'd love to, save some time for, questions, additional questions. Again, thank you, for everyone who posted the questions. We are happy to address them now. You can also email us. We have our email address in there. You can also follow us on continualengine.com. We're going to be sharing some resources later today or tomorrow, just things that Darcy was talking about. So you have communities that you can connect with and places to reach out to. Right. Okay, thank you all. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you and hopefully seeing you on future webinars. Have a great rest of the day and week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.